The wind over Sable Hollow did not howl. It shrieked a high-frequency tearing sound that suggested the atmosphere itself was being ripped apart by invisible hands. Inside the reinforced plating of the listening post, the sound was a dull, rhythmic thrumming, like a heartbeat gone wrong. Edwin sat in the command chair, a piece of furniture that had seen better decades. He stared at the primary monitor, his eyes tracing the jagged lines of the atmospheric interference. The black aurora was waking up. It was not a beautiful light show, not here. It was a bruise on the night sky, a swirling vortex of deep violet and abyssal black that scrambled sensors, distorted gravity, and if the local legends were to be believed, drove men to walk out into the freezing dark without their suits. He took a sip of synthesized coffee. It tasted like burnt copper and regret. Atmospheric density increasing, a mechanical voice chirped from the ceiling. A small, spherical drone hovered down its single optic lens, rotating with a soft whir. This was Puck. Puck was a relic much like Edwin. I estimate we have 3 hours before the ionization layer makes communication impossible. Or just as impossible as it usually is. Edwin grunted, setting the mug down on the console. Quiet, Puck. I'm tracking a ghost signature on Channel 4. Channel 4 is dead air, boss. Nothing but static and the screams of dying electrons. Look closer. Edwin leaned forward, his fingers playing over the haptic interface. He was a large man, his movements deliberate and heavy, burdened by gravity and memory. He isolated a thin sliver of the frequency spectrum, cutting away the roaring static of the aurora. There it was, a pulse. It was weak, buried under layers of magnetic distortion, but it was structured. It was artificial, Edwin. The voice whispered through the cabin speakers. Edwin froze. His heart hammered against his ribs, a sudden violent reaction that betrayed his stoic exterior. Edwin, position hold broken arrow. He knew that voice. He would know that voice at the end of the universe. It belonged to Kale. Sergeant Kale. The man Edwin had left behind in the mud of the Gantry Wars 10 years ago. Kale was dead. Edwin had seen the orbital bombardment turn the entire grid square into glass. There was no body to bury, only a crater. Audio fingerprint analysis, Edwin commanded, his voice rough. Puck bobbed in the air, spinning rapidly. Processing. Comparing against archival database match found. Subject Kalen Var. Status deceased. Confidence interval 99%. It's a recording, Edwin said, trying to convince himself. An old transmission bouncing off the ionosphere. Negative, Puck replied, and for once the drone's tone lacked its usual sarcasm. The timestamp is current. And boss, look at the waveform. Puck projected a hologram of the sound wave into the air. It was not a simple audio file. Beneath the peaks and valleys of the voice, there was a second, tighter frequency, a rhythmic pulsing pattern that looked like a jagged set of teeth. That is a neurosync loop, Puck explained. It is designed to trigger a specific emotional response in the listener. It is bait, Edwin. It is using a voice you trust to make you open the door. Edwin stared at the waveform. Someone was out there in the freezing dark, broadcasting a signal that wore the face of his dead friend. It was cruel. It was precise. And it meant that whoever sent it knew exactly who was listening in this God-forsaken wasteland. Ignore it, Edwin said, leaning back. It's a trap. Edwin, please, cold, the voice cracked, breaking into a sob that Edwin had heard once before, right before the comms went dead 10 years ago. Edwin closed his eyes. He gripped the armrests of his chair until the leather creaked. He was a veteran. He was a survivor. He had come to Sable Hollow to die slowly, of old age and silence, not to play hero. He had sworn off the field. He had sworn off the skills that had made him a weapon. He stood up. Boss, Puck asked, hovering lower. You are making the face. The I am about to do something stupid face. I hate that face. Prepare the mule, Edwin said, turning toward the locker at the back of the room, and charge the field stabilizer. The stabilizer. You haven't touched the forbidden gear in 7 years. You said if you ever touched it again, I was authorized to shock you." "Override authorization," Edwin snapped. He walked to the heavy metal locker and placed his palm on the scanner. The locks disengaged with a heavy clank. Inside, sitting in the shadows like a sleeping beast, was his old gear. The matte black armor weave, the magnetic boots. And there, resting on a shelf, were the gauntlets. They looked innocuous, thick gloves, laced with silver filaments and power nodes at the knuckles. But Edwin knew the weight of them. These were the conduits for the forbidden field skills. The technology that allowed a soldier to grab gravity and twist it to bend the trajectory of a bullet to crush a tank with a wave of a hand. It was outlawed. It killed the user slowly, frying the neural pathways, turning the brain into Swiss cheese. Edwin pulled the gloves on. The sensors bit into his skin, syncing with his nervous system. A wave of nausea rolled through him, followed by a rush of adrenaline that tasted like metal. The familiar hum of the field generators waking up buzzed in his bones. "Just a rescue," he whispered to the empty room. "Grab them. Bring them back. No fighting, no bending the world." "You are lying to yourself," Puck said, drifting into the locker room. "But if we are going to die, I would prefer we do it before my battery runs low. It is currently at 84%. Let's go." The surface of Sable Hollow was a nightmare of ice and obsidian rock. The wind did not just blow. It possessed physical weight, shoving against the hull of the mule as Edwin piloted the tracked rover across the glacier. The headlights cut through the swirling snow, revealing nothing but endless, jagged white. Above, the black aurora was pulsing. Ribbons of dark energy danced across the sky, blotting out the stars. Every time the aurora flared, the mule's instrument panel sparked, and the engine coughed. "Signal source is 2 kilometers north-northeast," Puck said, his voice coming through the comms in Edwin's helmet. "Interference is rising. I am detecting thermal anomalies. Big ones." "A crash?" Edwin asked, fighting the controls as the rover slid over a patch of black ice. "More like a dissection," Puck replied. Edwin crested a ridge of razor-sharp ice and saw it. Down in the valley, smoke spiraled up into the storm, black against the white snow. A small transport ship lay on its side. It was not smashed. The fuselage was relatively intact. But the engines had been sheared off cleanly. The metal edges glowed a dull orange, fading in the extreme cold. That was not an impact fracture. That was a high-intensity thermal lance. Someone had shot this ship down with surgical precision. They didn't want to destroy it. They wanted to stop it. Edwin brought the mule to a halt 50 meters from the wreck. He popped the canopy, and the cold hit him like a physical blow. The temperature was 40 degrees below zero. He adjusted his rebreather, checked the power levels on his gauntlets. They were dormant, thank the stars, and jumped down into the snow. "Stay with the rover, Puck. Keep the engines hot." "I will keep the heat on. Try not to get shot by the ghost of your dead friend." Edwin trudged through the snow, his magnetic boots engaging with the metallic deposits in the ice to keep him steady. He held a kinetic rifle in his right hand, but his left hand, the field hand, was twitching. The proximity to the aurora made the gauntlet hum. He reached the ship. The heat radiating from the cut metal was fading. He circled the hull, looking for the airlock. It had been blown open from the inside. "Survivors," he muttered. He rounded the nose of the ship and stopped. She was lying in the snow, half buried by a drift that had formed in the last 20 minutes. She wore a flight suit that had been shredded at the shoulder, revealing pale skin and dark blood. But it was the face that held him. She was Farrellyn. Her features were sharp, predatory, with high cheekbones and ears that tapered to delicate points, covered in fine, soft fur that blended into her hairline. A cat pilot. He had seen them in the border bars, usually drinking milk, laced with ethanol, and gambling, with credits they didn't have. They were fast, arrogant, and usually solitary. But she wasn't alone. Curled around her, forming a living wall against the wind, was a monster. It was a wolf, but a wolf the size of a small hovercar. Its fur was a mix of gray and white thick enough to stop a knife. It was a tracker wolf, a genetically uplifted breed used by the border wardens. This one was hurt. A nasty gash ran down its flank, matting the fur with blood that steamed in the cold air. As Edwin took a step forward, the wolf's head snapped up. Yellow eyes locked onto Edwin. A low growl vibrated through the ground, deep enough that Edwin felt it in the soles of his boots. The wolf did not retreat. It bared teeth that looked like serrated daggers. It was protecting her. "Easy," Edwin said, his voice amplified by his helmet speakers. He lowered the rifle slowly, slinging it over his back to show his hands. "I am not the one who shot you." The wolf Slate did not relax. His ears flattened. He shifted his weight, putting himself more firmly between Edwin and the unconscious pilot. The metal collar around the wolf's neck pulsed with a faint red light, a distress beacon, or perhaps a warning system. Edwin took another step. "She is freezing to death, boy. If you don't let me get to her, the cold will finish what the laser started." Slate snarled a vicious snapping sound. He tried to rise, but his back leg gave way, and he collapsed back into the snow with a whine of pain. The movement stirred the pilot. The Farallon woman gasped, her body arching in pain. Her eyes snapped open. They were gold with vertical slit pupils that dilated instantly in the dim light. She saw Edwin. She saw the armored figure looming over them. She didn't scream. She reached for the pistol at her belt, but her fingers were too frozen to grip it. "Stay down," Edwin ordered, kneeling a few meters away. "I am here to help." The woman looked at him, her gaze traveling from his faceplate down to his hands. Her eyes stopped at the gauntlets. The silver filaments were glowing faintly, reacting to the stress of the moment. Her eyes widened. Recognition. Fear. "The field," she rasped. Her voice was rough, shivering violently. Edwin stiffened. "What don't?" She coughed, pink froth bubbling at her lips. She looked him dead in the eye, and her next words hit him harder than the wind. "Don't bend the field. He creates ripples." Edwin froze. The wind howled around them, but for a second, there was silence in his head. Don't bend the field. It was the first rule of the forbidden arts. The more you bent gravity, the more you tore the fabric of local space, creating ripples that could be tracked by anyone with the right sensors. She knew. She knew who he was. Or at least, she knew what he was. "Who are you?" Edwin demanded. "Annie," she whispered. Her head lolled back. "Slate, bring Slate." Then she went limp. "Boss," Puck's voice cut through the comms, panicked. "We have company multiple signatures closing in from the south. Fast movers. Skimmers." Edwin looked at the scorch marks on the ship. He looked at the direction the tracks came from. They hadn't crashed. They had been herded. The attackers had clipped their wings and waited for them to land, using the distress signal as a lure. They used Kale's voice. Edwin realized a cold fury rising in his chest. They synthesized it to draw me out, or to draw anyone out. He looked at the two bodies in the snow. The Farallon girl, Annie, was fading fast. The wolf Slate was watching him with half-closed eyes, growling softly, but unable to fight. If he dragged them, it would take 10 minutes to get to the mule. The wind was picking up. The skimmers would be here in 5. He had to move them. Now. He looked at his hands. The gauntlets hummed. "Don't bend the field," she had said. "Sorry," Edwin muttered. He closed his eyes and clenched his fists. The sensation was instantaneous. It felt like a hook had been driven into his solar plexus and yanked upward. The world went gray. The sound of the wind vanished, replaced by the roar of blood in his ears. He reached out with his mind, grabbing the localized gravity well around Annie and the wolf. Lift. It wasn't magic. It was math made manifest by agony. He calculated the mass, the vector, the counterforce. He felt the weight of them in his mind, not his muscles. The snow around them exploded outward in a perfect circle. Annie and Slate lifted off the ground, floating in a bubble of distorted space. The wolf yelped, thrashing in the weightlessness, but Edwin clamped the field tighter, holding them still. Pain spiked through Edwin's temples, a white-hot lance. His nose began to bleed inside the helmet. "Puck, open the rear hatch!" Edwin roared, turning and running back toward the mule. He didn't carry them. He towed them. They floated behind him, suspended 3 feet in the air, shielded from the wind by the wall of compressed gravity he was projecting. It was exhausting. Every step felt like he was wading through wet concrete. "I am detecting high-energy output," Puck screamed. "You are lighting up the sensors like a flare. Every scanner within 50 kilometers can see us now." "Let them look," Edwin reached the mule. The rear ramp hissed open. He swung his arm, guiding the floating bodies into the cargo bay with a telekinetic shove. He released the field. They dropped gently onto the metal deck. Edwin collapsed against the side of the rover, gasping for air. He wiped his nose. The glove came away smeared with red. The headache was blinding. It had been 7 years, and he was rusty. He had used too much force, been too sloppy. He scrambled into the driver's seat and slammed the hatch control. "Go," he rasped. "Get us back to the cabin. Blind route. Keep us under the radar ceiling." "There is no radar ceiling," Puck argued, as the mule lurched forward, tracks spinning on the ice. "The Aurora is eating the radar. And you just painted a giant target on our backs with that gravity trick." "Shut up and navigate." Edwin glanced back into the cargo bay. Annie was still unconscious. Slate had dragged himself over to her, resting his massive head on her chest. The wolf's eyes were open, staring at Edwin. The aggression was gone, replaced by a confused, wary calculation. The wolf had felt the field. He knew that what Edwin had just done was unnatural. Edwin turned back to the windshield. The skimmers were visible now, 3 distinct lights on the horizon, moving fast, cutting through the storm. They were sleek, military grade. Not pirates, not scavengers. This was a hit squad. "They are gaining," Puck said. "Let's see how they handle the Badlands," Edwin gritted out. He yanked the controls hard to the left, driving the mule straight toward a field of jagged ice spires. It was suicide for a skimmer to fly through that at speed. For a tracked rover, it was just a bumpy ride. The mule slammed over the ice, shaking violently. Edwin drove with the desperation of a man who had forgotten how much he wanted to live until 5 minutes ago. They made it back to the cabin an hour later. The skimmers had peeled off, unable or unwilling to follow them into the treacherous terrain of the ice spires, or perhaps losing the signal once Edwin shut down the field. Edwin dragged Annie inside, first laying her on the cot near the heater. Slate limped in under his own power, refusing Edwin's help, leaving a trail of blood drops on the metal floor. The cabin was warm, a stark contrast to the hell outside. Edwin stripped off his helmet and the gauntlets. His hands were shaking. He poured himself a glass of water and downed it in one gulp, then another. He looked at his guests. Annie was pale, her breathing shallow. Her flight suit was torn, revealing complex tattoos on her collarbone, tribal markings of the Farallon clans. Slate curled up at the foot of the cot, shivering. The wolf's eyes never left Edwin. "Puck," Edwin said, his voice heavy. "Scan them. I want to know exactly what injuries we are dealing with. And scan that collar on the wolf. It has a transponder." "Scanning," Puck said, hovering over the bed. "The female has 3 fractured ribs, severe hypothermia, and internal bruising. The wolf has a laceration on the left flank, deep, but muscle only. No organ damage. He is tough." "And the collar." Puck hovered closer to Slate. The wolf bared his teeth, a low rumble building in his throat. "Nice doggy," Puck said nervously, backing away. "Boss, the collar is shielded. High-level encryption. But I am detecting a data storage unit inside. It is not just a tracker. It is a drive." Edwin leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. A Farallon pilot, a cyber-enhanced wolf, a data drive, and a hit squad that used the voices of dead men to set traps. We should have left them, Puck said softly. Statistically, this decreases our life expectancy by 100%. Improbable, Edwin corrected automatically. You can't decrease by 100% unless we are already dead. Give it time. Edwin walked over to the window. Outside, the storm had fully descended. The black aurora was no longer just a bruise. It was an open wound in the sky. Great curtains of black and purple light undulated over the ice, silent and terrifying. It looked like an eye-opening. He touched the cold glass. He had felt the pull of the field again. He had felt the power. And God help him, he had missed it. Behind him, Annie groaned. Slate, she murmured. The wolf licked her hand. Edwin turned around. He looked at the woman who knew his secret, and the wolf that guarded a secret of its own. Get the medkit, Puck, Edwin said, rolling up his sleeves. And heat up some nutrient paste. If they die now, I wasted a lot of energy for nothing. You are a terrible host, Puck muttered, but the drone flew off to fetch the supplies. Edwin looked back out at the ice. The dark shape of the skimmers hadn't followed them all the way, but they were out there, waiting. The beacon had said Edwin. They knew his name. They knew his location. And now, they knew he was active. He looked at the gauntlets sitting on the table. They seemed to hum a low vibration that matched the beating of his own heart. Welcome to Sable Hollow, he whispered to the storm. The black aurora flared, casting long, twisted shadows across the room, shadows that looked like claws reaching for them all. The cabin smelled of ozone-old heating coils and the metallic tang of dried blood. It was a dense, suffocating scent that clung to the recycled air, heavy, with the humidity of the geothermal scrubbers. Outside, the wind had ceased its high-pitched shrieking, replaced by a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated against the reinforced plating of the walls. It sounded like a massive heart beating miles beneath the ice. Annie woke with a gasp. Her body jerked upright, a reflex born of adrenaline and survival instinct, but pain immediately slammed her back down. It was a sharp, hot line of fire running along her ribcage. She hissed her ears, flattening against her skull, and her hands scrambled blindly at her belt for a weapon that was no longer there. Slate, she rasped. Her voice was a wreck, scraping against her throat like sandpaper. Her vision blurred, swimming in shapes of gray and orange. The panic was a cold knot in her stomach. If Slate was gone, if she was alone in a cage, she would tear her own throat out before she let Silas Brack interrogate her. He is by the heater, a voice said. It was deep calm and maddeningly unbothered. He has not moved in 4 hours. I tried to move him to check the dressing on his leg. He nearly took my hand off. Annie blinked, forcing her eyes to focus. The room was small, cluttered with salvage tech and piles of thermal blankets. In the corner, bathed in the orange glow of a heating unit, lay the massive gray shape of the wolf. Slate was breathing deeply, his flank rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His head was resting on his paws, but one yellow eye was cracked open, watching the man sitting at the metal table across the room. Annie let out a breath she felt she had been holding for days. Her shoulders sagged back against the thin mattress of the cot. He likes heat, Annie said. She tried to sit up again, slower this time. He hates the ice. Irony is not lost on wolves. Drink this. The man Edwin was suddenly standing beside her. He moved with a silence that shouldn't have been possible for someone of his size and bulk. He held out a tin cup. Steam curled off the surface of the liquid inside. Annie eyed him warily. She took the cup, her fingers brushing against his. His hands were rough, calloused, but they were steady. She sniffed the liquid. Nutrient paste dissolved in hot water, Edwin said, retreating to his chair. He sat down and picked up a soldering iron, returning his attention to a complex circuit board on the table. It tastes like wet cardboard, but it will put electrolytes back in your blood. You lost a lot of them. Annie took a sip. He was right about the taste. It was vile. but the warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the deep chill that had settled in her marrow out on the ice. She watched him work. He wasn't looking at her. He was focused entirely on the circuit board, his movements precise and economic. He had stripped off his heavy outer armor, wearing only a thick gray thermal shirt and cargo trousers. She looked down at her own chest. Her flight suit had been stripped to the waist, replaced by tight, professional bandaging. The wrapping was seamless, the pressure applied perfectly to support her fractured ribs without restricting her breathing. She saw the small, clear patch of a dermal regenerator adhering to the skin just above her hip. "You are not just a hermit," Annie said softly. Edwin didn't look up. "I live alone on a frozen moon. Being a hermit is the job description." "These bandages," she said, tapping her chest. "The dermal patch. The way you set the splint on Slate's leg. You didn't learn that reading manuals. That is field trauma care, military grade." Edwin paused. The tip of the soldering iron hovered over a microchip, a wisp of gray smoke curling up. "I read a lot of manuals," he said flatly. "You move like a soldier," Annie pressed. She wasn't sure why she was pushing him. Maybe it was the lingering fear, the need to know exactly who or what had pulled her out of the snow. And not a grunt, special forces, or something worse. Edwin set the iron down. He turned his chair slowly to face her. His face was a map of hard years. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into harsh weather, or perhaps harsh truths. His beard was gray, cropped short, practical. But his eyes were the thing that held her. They were dark, tired, and guarded. "You were bleeding out on my doorstep," Edwin said. "I stopped the bleeding. Do not read into it. It is just mechanics. You fix a pipe, you fix a rib. Same principle." "Slate doesn't let anyone touch him," Annie countered. "Especially not humans. If you got close enough to splint his leg without losing fingers, it means he smelled something on you. Competence. Or maybe just enough damage that he recognizes a packmate." Edwin snorted a dry, humorless sound. "He tried. I just move faster than I look." "Does he bite?" Annie looked at Slate. The wolf thumped his tail once against the metal floor, a heavy, rhythmic sound. "Only if you deserve it," she said. Comforting. "Why did you save us?" Annie asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. "You know we are being hunted. You saw the burn marks on my ship. That wasn't a crash. It was an execution that missed." Edwin picked up a rag and began wiping grease from his fingers. He looked at the circuit board, then at the dark viewport where the storm raged outside. "I like quiet," Edwin said. "Dead bodies on my front lawn attract scavengers. Scavengers make noise. I saved you to keep the property value up." It was a lie, a deflection. Annie could smell it on him, not a scent of deception, but the scent of avoidance. Ferelyn's senses were attuned to pheromones, to the subtle chemical shifts that betrayed emotion. This man smelled of old guilt. It clung to him like tobacco smoke. "The beacon," she said. "The voice. It called you by name." Edwin's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. "It was a recording," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "A synthesis. Someone dug up a ghost from my file and used it to pick the lock on my door." "They knew it would work," Annie said. "They knew you wouldn't be able to ignore it." "They were wrong," Edwin said. "I almost did." "But you didn't." Edwin stood up abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor. "You need rest. The regenerative patch needs another 6 hours to knit the bone density back to 50%. Sleep. If you try to walk, you will collapse, and I am not carrying you again." He walked over to the small kitchenette area, turning his back on her. It was a dismissal. Annie watched his back. She saw the tension in his shoulders. He was a coiled spring, holding himself together with sheer force of will. She looked at Slate. The wolf was watching Edwin too, his ears swiveled forward. "My name is Annie," she said. Edwin didn't turn around. He was filling a kettle. I know. It was on your flight tags. I was a pilot for the logistics corps, she continued, ignoring his attempt to end the conversation. Border run, nothing glorious. Mostly hauling filtration units and medical supplies to the outer colonies. Until 3 days ago. Edwin turned off the tap. The silence stretched. 3 days ago, Annie said, her voice hardening. I was hired to transport a package from a remote outpost in the Vale sector. Off the books, the client paid in hard currency, triple the standard rate. Edwin turned around, leaning against the counter. He crossed his arms. Let me guess. The package wasn't medical supplies. It was a person, Annie said. A dissident. A journalist named Holloway who had been digging into the warden's allocation of resources. But when I got there, Holloway was dead. The outpost had been purged. There was nothing left but ash and Slate. She gestured to the wolf. Slate was Holloway's tracker, she said. He was guarding the body. He wouldn't let anyone near. But when he saw me, he knew I was Farrellin. He let me check the body. And that is when I found the collar. Edwin's gaze shifted to the wolf. The metal collar around Slate's neck was thick, industrial scarred from years of use. The collar is a drive, Edwin said. My drone scanned it. Puck, Annie recalled the annoying flying sphere. Yes, it contains everything Holloway found. Records, audio logs, biometric data. Evidence of what? Edwin asked. That Warden Silas Brack isn't just skimming taxes, Annie said. He is disappearing people. Anyone who questions the quarantine zones, anyone who gets too close to the anomalies. He is using the Border Patrol as his own private death squad. Edwin's face didn't change. He remained impassive like a statue carved from the granite of the moon outside. Silas Brack is the law out here, Edwin said. He has 5,000 men, a fleet of interceptors, and you are one pilot with a broken rib and a dog. He is not the law, Annie spat her eyes, flashing gold. He is a butcher, and he wants this collar back. That is why he shot us down. That is why he used that voice to trap you. He thinks you are just a variable, a loose end. I am a loose end, Edwin said. I have been loose for 10 years. He won't stop, Annie said. He can't afford to. If this data gets to the central relay before the convergence. She stopped. She looked at the window. The convergence, Edwin repeated. The black aurora. It peaks in 48 hours, Annie said. When the aurora fully connects with the surface, the magnetic interference clears for a brief window. Maybe 10 minutes. It is the only time a high-bandwidth transmission can punch through the jamming field Brack has set up around the sector. You want to broadcast it, Edwin realized. You didn't crash here by accident. You were running for the lattice ruins. It is the only transmitter strong enough, Annie admitted. But we didn't make it. Suddenly, the air in the cabin shimmered. Puck materialized from the ceiling, dropping down between them, with a cheerful beep. Interruption, Puck chirped. I have finished analyzing the distress signal trace. Good news and bad news. Which do you want first? I will assume bad news because that is the thematic tone of this room. Speak, Puck, Edwin grumbled. The bad news, Puck said, projecting a hologram of the signal, is that the transmission that lured us out was not just a recording. It was a handshake protocol. When we opened the channel to listen, it pinged back. Edwin went very still. It pinged back, like a digital echo, Puck explained. It told the sender exactly where the receiver was located, coordinates, elevation, and even the serial number of your receiver dish. Annie swore softly in her native tongue, a sharp, guttural sound. They know we are here, Edwin said. It wasn't a question. They know exactly where here is, Puck confirmed. And the good news is that the storm is currently too thick for an orbital strike. So they have to come in on foot or low-altitude skimmer, which means we have time to make sandwiches. Edwin pushed himself off the counter. He walked to the weapon rack by the door. He picked up the heavy kinetic rifle, checking the action, with a loud clack clack. "No sandwiches," Edwin said. "Annie, how mobile is the wolf?" "Slate can walk," Annie said. "But he can't run. Not with that leg." "Then we hold the cabin," Edwin said. "We fortify. We wait for them to make a mistake." "And then?" Annie asked. "Then we survive until the storm breaks," Edwin said. "Or we don't." He looked at her, and for the first time the mask slipped. Annie saw something in his eyes that looked like profound exhaustion, mixed with a flicker of something dangerous. "What is in the files, Annie?" Edwin asked softly. "Really?" Annie hesitated. She looked at Slate, then back at Edwin. "It is not just names of dead people," she said. "Brack is researching the aurora. He thinks he can control it. He thinks the anomalies are not natural. He believes they are a weapon." Edwin stared at her. The silence in the room stretched thin, brittle, as ice. "He is wrong," Edwin said. His voice was barely a whisper. "How do you know?" Edwin walked over to her. He rolled up the sleeve of his thermal shirt. Annie stared. The skin of his left forearm was a ruin. It wasn't scarred by fire or knives. It looked like the flesh had been twisted, warped by forces that shouldn't exist. Dark, purple veins ran through the muscle like lightning strikes frozen in time. The tissue looked translucent in places, revealing shadows beneath the skin that seemed to move on their own. "Because I know what the field does to things," Edwin said. "I know what it costs to touch it." Annie reached out. Her fingers hovered over the scars but didn't touch them. She felt the cold radiating from his arm, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "Forbidden field skills," she whispered. "That is what the wardens call it. The ability to manipulate local gravity, to bend trajectory. It was banned 50 years ago." "For good reason," Edwin said, rolling the sleeve back down. "It kills you. It burns out your neural pathways. It turns your brain into static. Every time you use it, you lose a piece of yourself. A memory, a feeling, a name." He looked at her, his eyes bleak. "I used it today," he said. "To get you and the wolf into the mule. I bent the field." "I told you not to," Annie said. "You were dying," Edwin replied simply. "I made a choice." "Why?" Annie asked. "You don't know us. We are trouble. We brought a death squad to your door." Edwin walked back to the table and sat down. He picked up the soldering iron again, but he didn't turn it on. He just held it, staring at the cold metal tip. 10 years ago, Edwin began, his voice distant. "I was a captain in the shock troops. We were pinned down in a valley on Agate Prime. My orders were to hold the line. At all costs, they said. We had civilians behind us, a transport full of refugees." Annie listened, sensing that this was a story he hadn't told anyone in a long time. Even Puck was hovering silently in the corner, his optic lens dimmed. "The enemy pushed," Edwin said. "We were outgunned. My command frequency was jammed. I had to make a decision. Retreat and save my squad, or hold and die. I called for support. They told me to hold. They said reinforcements were 5 minutes away." He gripped the tool tighter. "They lied," Edwin said. "There were no reinforcements. We were bait. They wanted the enemy to commit to the valley so they could flank them from orbit. They sacrificed us. And the refugees. I watched the bombardment hit. It didn't care who was friend or foe. It just erased everything." He looked up at Annie. "I survived because I used the field," he said. "I created a bubble. I saved myself. Just me. Everyone else, Cale, they burned." Annie watched him. The shame in his voice was a physical weight. "So when I heard Cale's voice on the radio today," Edwin said, "I knew it was a trap. But I also knew that if I didn't go, if I let another person die because I was afraid of the consequences, then I might as well have died in that valley 10 years ago." Annie was silent. She looked at Slate, then back to Edwin. "In Farallon culture," Annie said softly, "we do not have contracts. We do not have orders. We have claws. Edwin raised an eyebrow. Claws. A promise is a claw, Annie explained. Once you sink it in, you cannot pull it out without tearing flesh. It is painful to hold, but to let go is to bleed. You sank a claw into us today, Edwin. You saved us. That binds you. I don't want to be bound, Edwin grumbled. I want to be left alone. Too late, Annie said. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You are part of the pack now, and the pack protects its own. Edwin looked at Slate. The wolf was watching him with an intensity that was unsettling. Great, Edwin muttered. Just what I needed. A wolf with an attachment disorder. The hours passed. The storm outside raged on, burying the cabin in drifts of snow. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The tension remained, but the sharp edge of distrust had dulled. Edwin worked on reinforcing the cabin's primitive shield generator. Annie, unable to sleep despite his orders, sat up and cleaned her pistol, a sleek, compact energy weapon she had pulled from her boot. They talked in fragments. Annie told him about the Farallon cities built into the giant redwood analog trees of her homeworld, where gravity was a suggestion rather than a rule. Edwin told her about the quiet of Sable Hollow, how the ice sang when the temperature dropped below 80 degrees. It was mundane conversation, the kind soldiers exchanged in foxholes, to remind themselves they were still people. Around midnight, Annie's head began to nod. The painkillers and the exhaustion finally won. She slumped forward, her forehead resting on her knees. Edwin watched her for a moment. He put down his tools. He stood up and walked over to a locker, pulling out a heavy wool coat. It smelled of cedar and machine oil. He walked over to the cot. He draped the coat over her shoulders, tucking it in around her fractured ribs. She didn't wake, but she sighed, shifting slightly into the warmth. Edwin straightened up and found himself staring into the yellow eyes of the wolf. Slate hadn't moved. He was watching Edwin's hands. I am not going to hurt her, Edwin whispered to the wolf. Slate stared for another beat, then let out a long, huffing breath. He lowered his head back onto his paws. His tail gave a single soft thump against the floor. It was a concession, a truce. Good boy, Edwin muttered. He walked back to the window. The coffee in his cup was cold. Outside, the black aurora was reaching its crescendo. The sky was a swirling vortex of impossible colors, black-violet, bruised indigo. It was beautiful in a way that made your teeth ache. Puck floated up beside him. Atmospheric ionization is at 90%, Puck whispered. The interference is almost solid. No signals in or out. They will use the cover, Edwin said. They will move when we are blind. Boss, Puck said, his voice hesitant. Look. Edwin looked where the drone was pointing. Far out on the ice, through the swirling darkness and the distortion of the aurora, there was a light. It was small, barely a pinprick, but it was moving. It wasn't the erratic flash of lightning or the glow of the gas clouds. It was steady. It was artificial. And it was getting closer. Thermal imaging, Edwin commanded. Trying, Puck said. Sensors are garbage, but I am picking up heat signatures. Multiple. Ground-based. Edwin leaned closer to the glass. The light split into 2, then 3. They are not waiting for the storm to break, Edwin said grimly. They are using it. He turned away from the window. He looked at Annie sleeping under his coat. He looked at Slate, who was already raising his head, a low growl building in his chest. Edwin walked to the wall and killed the interior lights. The cabin plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the flickering red light of the heater and the ghostly purple glow of the aurora outside. Wake her up, Edwin said to the wolf. Company is here. Slate stood up, shaking off his lethargy. He nudged Annie's hand with his wet nose. Edwin picked up his rifle. He felt the weight of it familiar and heavy. But his left hand, the hand with the field scars, began to itch. It was a phantom sensation, a buzzing under the skin that screamed for release. He clenched his fist, fighting the urge. Not yet, he told himself. Not unless I have to. But as the lights outside grew brighter, cutting through the storm, like eyes of a predator, Edwin knew. He would have to. The wind outside had changed. It was no longer the chaotic shrieking of a storm losing its mind. It had settled into a low, predatory hum that vibrated in the teeth of anyone foolish enough to be awake. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and the sharp chemical tang of explosives. Edwin knelt on the metal grating of the floor, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who had rigged demolitions in his sleep. He was wiring a proximity sensor to a canister of compressed coolant. It was a crude trap, one that would not kill, but would freeze the hydraulic joints of any exosuit that stepped within 3 meters. "You are using the blue wire," Puck observed. The drone was hovering at Edwin's shoulder, its single optic lens zooming in and out with a soft whir. "The manual specifically states that for a delay circuit, one should use the yellow wire. You are violating the warranty." "There is no warranty, Puck," Edwin grunted, twisting the copper strands together. "And I am not building a delay. I want it instantaneous. If they breach the door, I want them turned into ice sculptures before they can raise a weapon." "I was created for aerial reconnaissance," Puck lamented, drifting higher to avoid a spark from Edwin's soldering iron. "I was designed to soar through the clouds, mapping majestic mountain ranges. I was not built to be a decoy in a frozen shack while you turn the living room into a death trap." From the corner of the room, Annie looked up. She was sitting on a crate, cleaning the heavy kinetic rifle Edwin had given her. Her movements were stiff, her ribs still knitting together under the thermal bandages, but her hands were steady. "I was born to fly to metal ball," Annie said, her voice dry. She racked the slide of the rifle, the sound loud and metallic in the small space. "Do you think I chose to fall out of the sky? Do you think I enjoy learning how to shoot a gun that weighs more than my arm?" "You could have chosen a career in interpretive dance," Puck countered. "Low impact, high artistic value." "Focus," Edwin said, cutting through the banter. He snapped the casing shut on the mine and stood up. His knees popped. He felt every year of his age tonight. "The traps are set at the main airlock and the ventilation intake. If they try to gas us, the intake reverses and blows it back in their faces. But we need an exit." He walked over to the back wall of the cabin, where a heavy rug covered a section of the floor. He kicked the rug aside, revealing a welded hatch that looked like it hadn't been opened in a decade. "The geothermal vent," Edwin explained. "It runs down into the crust. It is hot, it smells like sulfur, and it is tight. But it leads to the lava tubes. It is our only way out if they surround us." Annie walked over, limping slightly. She looked down at the hatch. "And Slate. He can barely walk across the room." "We lower him," Edwin said. "I have a winch." "He will hate it," Annie said. "Better than being stuffed and mounted on Silas Brack's wall," Edwin replied. They spent the next 2 hours turning the cabin into a fortress. It was a grim task, but there was a strange rhythm to it. Edwin found himself watching Annie. She was adapting. Most pilots he knew would be useless, on the ground, panicked out of their element. But Annie possessed a predator's adaptability. She didn't complain about the cold or the pain. She just absorbed the situation and looked for the angle that would let her survive. When the work was done, they sat near the heater, eating another meal of nutrient paste. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was the companionable silence of 2 soldiers waiting for the artillery to start. "Your stance is wrong," Edwin said suddenly. Annie looked up a spoon halfway to her mouth. "Excuse me." "When you were holding the rifle earlier," Edwin said, "you are leaning back. Farallons have a different center of gravity because of your leg structure. If you fire that kinetic rifle leaning back like that, the recoil will dislocate your shoulder." Annie set the spoon down. She picked up the rifle, checking the safety, and stood up. She assumed the firing stance she had been using. "Show me," she said. Edwin stood. He didn't touch her. He moved to her side, mimicking her posture. "Lean into it," he instructed. "Put your weight on your forward leg. Dig your claws or your boots into the floor. You have to be the anchor. The gun wants to push you. You have to push back." Annie adjusted. She shifted her weight, growling low in her throat, as the movement pulled at her fractured ribs. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she sighted down the barrel. "Like this?" she asked. "Better," Edwin said. "Now don't hold your breath. Humans hold their breath to aim. You shouldn't. Your heart rate is faster than mine. If you hold your breath, you create a tremor. Fire on the exhale. Between the beats." Annie exhaled, a long, steady hiss. Click. She pulled the trigger on an empty chamber. The rifle didn't waver a millimeter. "Good," Edwin said. Annie lowered the weapon. She looked at him, her golden eyes studying his face. "Now you." "Me what?" "You smell like a tourist," Annie said. Edwin blinked. "I beg your pardon." "You rely on your eyes," Annie said, tapping her own nose. "But out there in the storm, your eyes are useless. The aurora distorts light. It creates phantoms. But it cannot change the scent of things. If you want to know where Brack's men are, you have to stop looking and start smelling." Edwin crossed his arms. "I have a drone for that." "The drone is a machine," Annie said. "It tells you data. It doesn't tell you intent. Close your eyes." Edwin hesitated, then closed them. "What do you smell?" Annie asked softly. "Oil," Edwin listed. "Old coffee." "The heater." "Unwashed bodies." "Deeper," Annie commanded. "Ignore the loud smells. Find the quiet ones. What is coming through the vents?" Edwin frowned. He concentrated. He pushed past the metallic tang of the cabin. He focused on the thin draft of air, leaking in from the storm outside. "Ozone," he said. "The electrical charge from the aurora." "Keep going." "Ice," Edwin said. "But wet ice. Slush." "Friction," Annie corrected. "Ice melts when heat passes over it. Skimmer engines. Or exosuits." "What else?" Edwin breathed in slowly. There was something faint, sharp, acrid. "Tabana gas," Edwin said, his eyes snapping open. "Weapon coolant." Annie nodded. "They are close enough that their weapon discharge vents are drifting downwind. 200 meters, maybe 3. Edwin looked at the door. "They are testing the perimeter." "They are waiting for us to panic," Annie said. "To run." "We are not running," Edwin said. Later that afternoon, during a lull in the storm, Edwin suited up. He told Annie to stay on the comms and keep the rifle trained on the door. He needed to see what was out there. He needed to know why they hadn't attacked yet. He slipped out of the airlock, the wind hitting him like a physical blow. The visibility was poor, perhaps 10 meters. The black aurora was pulsing above, casting erratic shadows that danced and twisted on the snow. He moved in a crouch, using the ice ridges for cover. He didn't use the field. He didn't dare. Any spike in gravitational waves would light him up on their sensors, like a flare. He had to do this the old-fashioned way. Boots and eyes. He circled the cabin, keeping a wide perimeter. He found the evidence of their presence quickly. Sensor spikes driven into the ice. Small black rods that hummed with a low frequency. They were triangular, creating a kill box around the cabin. But something else caught his eye. Near the edge of a crevasse about 50 meters to the east, there were footprints. Edwin stopped. He knelt down, brushing the fresh drift of snow away. The footprints were wrong. The ice here was soft, a mixture of powder and slush, caused by the geothermal heat from below. Edwin's own boots sank 2 inches deep. But these tracks barely broke the surface. They were shallow, almost imperceptible depressions. It looked as if a man weighing 200 pounds had walked across the snow while weighing no more than a feather. A cold chill that had nothing to do with the weather crawled up Edwin's spine. "Impossible," he whispered. He touched the track. The snow was compressed but not crushed. Gravity manipulation, but not the organic kind. not the forbidden field skills that Edwin carried in his blood and his scars. This was technological. It was clean, sterile. Brack didn't just have soldiers. He had field simulation suits. Edwin sat back on his heels. The implications were terrifying. The wardens had always hunted field users. They called them abominations, unstable weapons that had to be put down. But if Brack had developed a suit that could mimic the effect, a suit that could negate weight dampen inertia, then he wasn't just enforcing the law. He was stealing the power for himself. And if they had field suits, Edwin's advantage was gone. He couldn't crush them with gravity if they could just neutralize the wave with a counter-frequency. "Boss," Puck's voice crackled in his ear. "Heart rate elevation detected. Did you find a polar bear or something worse?" "Worse," Edwin said, standing up and wiping the snow from his gloves. "They have null gravity tech. They can walk on the snow without sinking. They can probably jump 3 stories high." "That sounds like cheating," Puck noted. "It means they want me alive," Edwin said, staring into the swirling white mist. "They are not just here to kill the witnesses. They are here to study the specimen. They want to know how I do it so they can calibrate their toys." He turned back toward the cabin. The hunter had just realized the trap was far more elaborate than he thought. Night fell, or what passed for night under the constant glow of the aurora. The cabin was dimly lit, the only light coming from the amber display of the monitors and the red coil of the heater. Annie and Edwin sat on the floor, sharing a pot of hot water. They had run out of coffee. Slate was awake, pacing the small perimeter of the room. The wolf's limp was better, his movement fluid and restless. Every few minutes, he would stop and stare at the ceiling, his ears swiveling toward the sky, listening to the song of the aurora that only he could hear. "You look like you saw a ghost out there," Annie said. She was holding her cup with both hands, the steam wreathing her face. Edwin stared into his cup. "I saw the future, and I didn't like it." He told her about the footprints, about the suits. Annie listened, her expression darkening. "So he has weaponized it. That explains why he wants the data caller so badly. Holloway must have found proof of the RD labs." "It explains why he hasn't vaporized us from orbit," Edwin said. "He needs to see the real thing in action. He needs to compare his artificial field against a biological one. I am not a person to him, Annie. I am a stress test." He rubbed his left arm, the one with the scars. It ached constantly now, a dull throb that synchronized with the pulses of the aurora outside. "Tell me about the first time," Annie said softly. "The first time you used it to save someone. Not the war. Before." Edwin looked at her. He wanted to deflect, to make a joke, to tell her to mind her own business. But the walls of the cabin felt very close tonight, and the silence outside was filled with monsters. "I was 19, Edwin said. "I was a cadet. There was a training accident. A transport shuttle lost its repulsors during a landing drill. It was falling. There were 30 kids inside." He traced the rim of his cup. "I didn't think," he continued. "I just reached out. It wasn't a technique I had learned. It was instinct. I felt the weight of the shuttle in my head. I felt the gravity pulling it down. And I just said no." He looked up at Annie. "I caught it," he said. 30 tons of metal. I stopped at 5 feet from the ground. My nose bled for a week. I was blind for 3 days. But I saved them." "And that is when they put you in the program," Annie guessed. "That is when they put me in the cage," Edwin corrected. "They didn't give me a medal. They gave me a handler. They told me I was a national asset, a weapon class Omega. They taught me how to crush tanks, how to deflect artillery. But they never taught me how to stop the noise. The noise." "The field isn't silent," Edwin said, tapping his temple. "When you open yourself to gravity, you hear the universe moving. You hear the planets grinding against the dark. It is loud, Annie. It never stops. That is why users go mad. That is why we burn out." Annie set her cup down. She shifted closer to him. The movement was fluid, cat-like. She reached out and took his left hand, the scarred one. She turned it over, palm up. She didn't look at the scars with revulsion. She looked at them with a strange curiosity. "In my culture," Annie said, "we do not fear power. We fear those who use it without cost. You pay a price, Edwin, every time. That makes you trustworthy." She pressed her thumb against the inside of his wrist, checking his pulse. It was a clinical gesture, something a medic would do, but her skin was warm, and her touch was lingering. "Your heart is slow," she murmured. "For a human." "I am cold," Edwin said. His voice sounded rough to his own ears. "No," Annie said. She looked up, her golden eyes locking onto his. "You are just lonely. You have been out here in the ice so long, you have forgotten what heat feels like." The distance between them seemed to vanish. The air in the cabin, usually cold and stale, suddenly felt charged. Edwin looked at her lips, then up to her eyes. He saw the vertical pupils widen. He saw the question there. He leaned in, just an inch. It was an instinct gravity of a different kind. Annie didn't pull away. She tilted her head, her breath hitching slightly. Whimper. The sound broke the moment like a hammer hitting glass. Edwin and Annie jerked apart. Slate had collapsed near the door. The wolf was scrabbling at the metal floor, his claws screeching. He was whining a high-pitched sound of distress. "Slate!" Annie scrambled over to him, ignoring the pain in her ribs. Edwin was there a second later. "What is it?" "The leg." "No," Annie said, her hands moving over the wolf's body. "He is not bleeding. He is vibrating." Slate's muscles were locked in a spasm. His eyes were rolled back, showing the whites. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking through the ceiling, straight at the sky. "The aurora," Edwin said, looking up. The metal roof of the cabin was groaning. The reinforced beams were vibrating, singing a discordant note. "The convergence is starting early." "He is linked to it," Annie realized. "The tracker wolves are sensitive to electromagnetic fields. The surge is hurting him." Slate let out a howl, a long, mournful sound that merged with the hum of the building. Edwin grabbed a sedative injector from the medkit. "Hold him down." Annie wrapped her arms around the wolf's neck, whispering soothing words in Farallon. Edwin plunged the needle into Slate's flank. The wolf thrashed once, then slumped, his breathing heavy and ragged. The moment of intimacy was gone, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. Annie sat back, stroking Slate's fur. She looked at Edwin. Her face was pale. "If we don't make it," she said softly. "Don't start," Edwin warned. "Listen to me, Edwin," she said, her voice fierce. "If they breach the door, if I go down, you take Slate. You don't let Brack have him. You don't let him have the collar." "We are both getting out," Edwin said, standing up and pacing away. "Or we are both staying." "That is not a plan," Annie argued. "That is a suicide pact. Slate is the mission. I am just the transport." "I am not leaving you behind," Edwin snapped. He turned on her, his anger flaring. "I left people behind once. I am not doing it again. Do not ask me to choose between the mission and the person. I am done with that choice." Annie looked at him, surprised by the vehemence in his voice. She softened. "You are a stubborn old man," she said. "And you are a bossy cat," Edwin retorted. "If I die," Annie continued, ignoring him, "and you let them take Slate, I will haunt you. I will come back as a poltergeist and hide all your left socks." "I don't wear socks," Edwin lied. "I have superior circulation." "Liar," Annie smiled weakly. "Don't let them win, Edwin. Promise me." Edwin looked at the wolf, then at the woman who had crashed into his solitude and woken him up. "I promise," he said. "No diorama for Brack." A deep, reverberating thrum shook the floor. It was strong enough to knock a wrench off the table. "Puck!" Edwin yelled. "Status!" The drone dropped from the ceiling, its lights flashing red. "Status is critical," Puck screamed. Atmospheric ionization has reached 100% saturation. The black aurora is singing boss, and I am picking up multiple breaches on the perimeter sensors. They are here, Edwin said. He grabbed his rifle. He grabbed the gauntlets from the table and shoved his hands into them. The power coupling engaged with a snap. The hum of the field washed over him, familiar and terrifying. Get to the hatch, Edwin ordered Annie. Get Slate ready to move. What about you? Annie asked, dragging the groggy wolf toward the back of the room. I am going to say hello, Edwin said. He walked to the main airlock. He could hear it now. Not the wind, but the sound of boots on metal. The sound of something heavy landing on the roof. The aurora was screaming outside, a cacophony of magnetic noise. But under it, Edwin heard the hiss of a cutting torch. The door began to glow cherry red in the center. Knock, knock, Edwin whispered. He raised his hands. The gauntlets flared with blue light. The metal of the door groaned as he grabbed it with his mind. He didn't wait for them to cut through. He didn't wait for them to breach. He pulled. The heavy blast door was ripped off its hinges, flying outward into the snowstorm with the force of a cannonball. Edwin stepped into the breach, the wind howling around him, the field crackling at his fingertips. Get off my lawn, he roared, and the night exploded. The blast door cartwheeled into the darkness, vanishing into the swirling white void of the storm. For a second, there was a vacuum of silence, a breath held by the universe, before the night rushed in to fill the gap. The wind did not just blow. It screamed, a cacophony of shrieking ice and tearing atmosphere that hit Edwin like a physical wall. But Edwin was a stone. He stood in the breach, his boots locked to the deck, plaiting his coat, whipping violently around his legs. The gauntlets on his hands were no longer just humming. They were singing a high-pitched resonance that harmonized with the terrifying melody of the black aurora overhead. Targets acquired, Puck yelled, though his voice was barely audible over the gale. The drone was tucked behind a bulkhead, vibrating with indignation. They are jamming me. They are flooding the entire spectrum with white noise. It is incredibly rude. I cannot even access my playlist for combat scenarios. Forget the music, Edwin roared. Give me thermal. I am trying, but the interference is, oh, look at that. Through the blinding snowlights appeared. They were not the soft, organic glow of the aurora. These were harsh, tactical beams, blue-white searchlights cutting through the gloom. They moved with unnatural smoothness. The figures holding them did not trudge through the deep drifts. They glided over the surface, their null-gravity suits negating the treacherous terrain. This is Warden Silas Brack, a voice boomed. It came from everywhere and nowhere, amplified by speakers on the approaching skimmers, cutting through the wind with terrifying clarity. The voice was calm, reasonable, the tone of a bureaucrat filing a tax return, not a man ordering an execution. Edwin, the voice continued, you are in violation of the Colonial Armistice Section 4 Paragraph 2, harboring a fugitive, possession of illegal biotech, unsanctioned use of Class A weaponry. Edwin stepped out onto the metal ramp, the snow stinging his face. He raised his left hand and the snow around him simply stopped falling. It hung suspended in midair, caught in a microgravity bubble before being flung sideways. I am adding resisting arrest to the list, Brack said, sounding almost bored. Listen to me, soldier. There is no need for bloodshed. Give me the Farallon. Give me the wolf. And the drive. If you do that, I will grant you amnesty. You can go back to your hole. You can rot in peace. Edwin laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound that carried no humor. Amnesty, Edwin shouted back, his voice amplified by the field manipulation in his throat, making it boom like a thunderclap. You speak as if I like being forgiven. You think I want your permission to breathe? Brack, come and take them. Have it your way, Brack sighed. Engage. The night exploded. It didn't start with bullets. It started with silence. The Nulgi troopers raised their weapons, suppressed high-velocity railguns. The air around the cabin filled with the deadly thwip 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 of projectiles tearing through the sound barrier. Sparks showered from the doorframe as rounds hammered the metal. Edwin didn't dive for cover. He threw his right hand forward. A wall of compressed air dense as concrete slammed into the incoming fire. The bullets hit the invisible barrier and shattered shrapnel, raining down harmlessly. "Annie now," Edwin signaled. From the shattered window to his left, a beam of kinetic energy lashed out. Annie was firing on the exhale, just as he had taught her. She didn't aim for the soldiers, she aimed for their tech. The shot took a trooper in the knee joint of his exosuit. The hydraulic line ruptured, spraying coolant. The suit seized up instantly in the freezing cold. The trooper toppled face first into the snow, his null G field flickering out, leaving him to sink like a stone. "One down!" Annie yelled, her voice tight with pain, but fueled by adrenaline. "Keep them back," Edwin ordered. "They are trying to flank." He moved forward, stepping off the ramp and onto the ice. He didn't sink. He adjusted the gravity under his boots, making himself lighter than air, then heavier than lead with each step. He moved with a jarring staccato rhythm that threw off the targeting computers of the enemy. Two troopers rushed him from the right, moving with the eerie grace of dancers. They fired a net launcher, a weighted mesh designed to entangle and electrocute. Edwin didn't dodge. He caught the net in midair, not with his hands, with his mind. He felt the weight of the mesh, the velocity of the weights, the electrical charge coursing through the fibers. It felt like holding a live wire. The sensation traveled up his arm, burning through the neural connectors of the gauntlet, spiking into his brain. Twist. He rotated his wrist. 10 meters away, the net stopped, crumpled into a ball, and reversed direction. It shot back at the troopers with double the speed. They scrambled to evade, but the gravity well sucked them in. The net hit them, the electric charge discharging, in a brilliant flash of blue light. They went down convulsing. "I am detecting high dopamine levels in your brain, boss," Puck screamed, darting out to zap a sensor drone that was trying to flank them. "You are enjoying this. That is medically concerning." "I am busy," Edwin grunted. But Puck was right. The field was singing to him. Every time he reached out and grabbed the fabric of the world, every time he told gravity to sit down and shut up, a rush of euphoria hit him. It was better than alcohol. It was better than sleep. It was the feeling of being a god. And it was terrifying. "Edwin left flank!" Annie screamed. He spun around. A skimmer had come over the ridge, its lights blinding. A heavy repeater cannon mounted on the nose spun up. Edwin raised his hands to create a shield, but he was too slow. The fatigue of the first few moves was already setting in. Then a gray blur launched itself from the cabin door. Slate. The wolf didn't run. He bounded, ignoring his injured leg, fueled by pure protective instinct. He didn't attack the skimmer. He attacked the drone that was guiding it. A small, targeting drone was hovering just above the snow-painting Annie, with a laser lock. Slate leaped, jaws snapping shut around the drone. Metal crunched. The drone exploded. The force of the blast threw Slate backward. He hit the ice hard, rolling his fur-singed blood, spraying from a new wound on his shoulder. "Slate!" Annie screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated fury. Tears streamed down her face, freezing instantly on her cheeks. "You stupid, stupid dog!" She broke cover. She stood up in the window frame, exposing herself to the fire, and unleashed hell. She fired the kinetic rifle until the barrel glowed red. She didn't miss. She took out the skimmer's spotlight. She took out the gunner. She was a woman possessed. "Cover her!" Edwin roared at Puck. He ran to Slate. The wolf was trying to stand, growling at his own legs. The collar, the precious drive, was dented, but intact. "Stay down," Edwin commanded, pushing the wolf's head into the snow. He created a low-level gravity dome over them, deflecting the stray rounds. "They are closing the net," Puck warned. "Heat signatures everywhere. We are boxed in." Edwin looked up. The Nulgi troopers were advancing in a semicircle, pushing them back toward the great crevasse, a fissure in the ice that dropped 200 meters straight down into the darkness. Brack knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't trying to kill them anymore. He was hurting them. Back, Edwin grabbed Slate by the scruff of the neck and dragged him. Annie, fall back to the ridge. They retreated, giving ground for time. The wind howled louder, seeming to cheer for the violence. The black aurora pulsed directly overhead, a swirling vortex that looked like it was descending to swallow the moon whole. They reached the edge of the crevasse. Behind them was the drop. In front of them was a wall of soldiers. Brack stepped out from behind a line of troopers. He was wearing a pristine white environmental suit, his face visible through the clear visor. He looked disappointed. "I offered you a way out, Edwin," Brack said, his voice amplified. "I offered you dignity." "You offered me a cage," Edwin spat. He was breathing hard now. Blood was trickling from his nose, running down into his beard. The headache was a splitting axe in his skull. "And now you have a grave," Brack said. He signaled to a heavy trooper standing beside him. The trooper raised a weapon Edwin recognized. It wasn't a gun. It was a siege caster. It fired a monolithic capture net weighted with maglocks and hardened against cutting. It was designed to take down dropships. "Fire," Brack ordered. The weapon thumped. A massive canister shot into the air. It split open, and a web of steel cables expanded, blocking out the sky. It was too big to dodge. It was too heavy to deflect with a simple shield. It was falling directly on Annie and Slate. Annie looked up. She didn't fire. She knew it was useless. She just reached down and put her hand on Slate's head. Time stopped for Edwin. He looked at the net falling. He looked at Annie. He looked at the scars on his arm. "Don't bend the field," she had said. "It kills you." "Not today," Edwin whispered. He didn't just reach out. He opened the door. He tore down the mental walls he had built over 10 years. He let the forbidden field skills flood his system, uncapped, unfiltered, raw. The world turned gray. The sound of the wind vanished, replaced by the deafening thud of his own heart. Thump, thump, thump. He saw the gravity lines of the universe. They looked like strings of light connecting everything to everything else. He saw the net falling. He saw the mass of it. He grabbed the strings. He didn't push the net. He grabbed the space under the net and twisted it. With a primal scream that tore his throat raw, Edwin wrenched his hands upward. The laws of physics screamed in protest. The trajectory of the falling net didn't just curve, it broke. The heavy steel mesh paused in midair, shuddering, and then launched itself sideways with the violence of a whip crack. It flew past Annie. It flew past Slate. It smashed into the line of troopers on the left flank, wrapping around 3 of them and crushing their armor like aluminum foil. Edwin fell to his knees. The feedback was instant. It wasn't pain. It was overload. His vision went white. He felt like he was expanding, like his consciousness was leaking out of his body and merging with the aurora. He could feel the ice miles away. He could feel the orbit of the moon. It was beautiful. It was perfect. He didn't want to go back to being a small, cold man in a cabin. He wanted to stay here in the light. "Let go," the aurora whispered. "Just let go." "Edwin!" A voice cut through the noise. "Edwin, look at me!" He felt hands on his face. Warm hands, rough skin. He blinked, fighting the blindness. Annie was there. She was kneeling in the snow in front of him. She had dropped her rifle. She had grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. She pressed her forehead against his. Hard. Bone against bone. "Look at me," she demanded, her voice fierce, terrified and anchoring. "Don't look at the lights. Don't look at the sky. Look at me." Edwin focused. He saw her eyes. Golden, slit pupils. Filled with fear, yes, but mostly filled with him. "I am here," she whispered. "You are here. You are Edwin. You are not the storm." The connection broke the trance. The gray world receded. The color rushed back in the red of blood, the white of snow, the black of the night. The sound returned the wind. The gunfire Puck screaming something about optimal retreat vectors. Edwin gasped, sucking in air that felt like broken glass. He grabbed Annie's wrists, holding onto her like a drowning man. I almost... I know, she said. But you didn't. Now stand up. We have to move. She pulled him up. He swayed dizzy, but he was back in his body. The enemies were regrouping. Brack was shouting orders, furious that his siege net had failed. "The trap," Edwin rasped. "The ice trap." "Lead the way," Annie said, picking up her rifle. They ran toward the crevasse, but not to the edge. They ran toward a cluster of jagged ice spires that Edwin had rigged earlier that day. The troopers pursued, emboldened by Edwin's collapse. "Target is exhausted. Move in, secure the assets." They charged into the spire cluster. Edwin stopped. He turned around. He raised a shaking hand. He didn't need a lot of power for this, just a nudge. He snapped his fingers. The charges he had buried in the ice detonated. But they weren't explosive charges. They were resonance thumpers. They sent a shockwave through the unstable ice sheet. Crack. The sound was louder than the thunder. The entire shelf of ice beneath the troopers' feet gave way. It wasn't a fall. It was a slide. The glacier shifted, opening a maw that swallowed the first line of attackers whole. Snow and ice cascaded down, creating a blinding white curtain between Edwin's team and Brack. "Go, go, go!" Edwin yelled. He dragged Annie and Slate toward a dark, steaming hole in the rock face, the geothermal vent. Puck zipped inside first. "It smells like rotten eggs and despair in here." "My favorite." Annie threw Slate down the slide. It was a smooth, algae-slicked chute carved by steam. The wolf yelped as he vanished into the dark. Annie looked at Edwin. Together, they jumped. The slide was a terrifying claustrophobic rush of heat and darkness. They tumbled down, sliding for what felt like miles, the air growing hotter and wetter with every second. They spit out onto a bed of soft, mossy fungus in a cavern deep beneath the crust. Edwin rolled to a stop and lay there staring up at the darkness. His heart was still hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The silence down here was absolute, broken only by the drip of condensation and the heavy breathing of his companions. "Status check," Puck whispered, his light dimming to a soft amber. "We are approximately 200 meters below the surface. Thermal shielding is holding. Pursuit is unlikely, unless they want to jump down a chimney." Annie sat up. She crawled over to Slate, checking him quickly. The wolf was battered, limping, but alive. He licked her face once, then collapsed onto the moss, exhausted. Annie turned to Edwin. He hadn't moved. He was lying on his back, his arm thrown over his eyes. "Edwin," she asked softly. "I am fine," he said. His voice was a wreck. "You are lying," she said. She crawled over to him. She pulled his arm away from his face. His eyes were bloodshot, the vessels burst. Blood was drying on his upper lip. But it was the expression in his eyes that scared her. It was the look of an addict who had just tasted the needle and had it ripped away. "You used the full field," Annie said. "You didn't just bend it. You broke it." "I had to," Edwin whispered. "The net." "I know," she said. She reached out and touched the scars on his arm. They were hot to the touch, pulsing with a faint residual light. "It felt good," Edwin confessed. The words tumbled out of him, shameful and honest. "Annie, it felt right. Up there, holding that net, I felt like I was finally what I was supposed to be. I wasn't a broken old man. I was powerful." He squeezed his eyes shut, a tear leaking out. "I am not afraid of dying," he choked out. "I have been ready to die for 10 years. I am afraid of becoming that. A thing that only lives to destroy. A thing that loves the destruction." He looked at her, his soul naked. "I am a monster, Annie. You saw it. I wanted to kill them all. I wanted to crush them into paste. Not to save you, but because I could. Annie looked at him. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull her hand away. In the dim light of the drone, her face was fierce and tender. "You are not a monster," she said firmly. "Monsters don't cry because they almost liked it. Monsters don't stop." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the cavern. "I have spent my whole life running," Annie said. "I trust no one. Everyone has a price. Everyone has an angle. I am afraid to trust Edwin. It terrifies me more than Brack, more than the Aurora." She took his hand, the dangerous one, the hand that could crush a tank, and pressed it against her own chest, right over her heart. "But I trust you," she said. "I trust the man who covered a wolf with his coat. I trust the man who hesitated." Edwin felt her heartbeat under his palm. It was fast, fluttery, alive. It was the opposite of the cold, heavy rhythm of the field. "You shouldn't," he whispered. "Too late," Annie said. "The claw is sunk. You are stuck with us." Edwin let out a breath, a long, shuddering exhale that seemed to empty the poison from his lungs. He squeezed her hand gently. "You are a very inconvenient woman," he murmured. "I try," she smiled, though her lip trembled. "Excuse me," Puck's voice cut through the moment sharp and tinny. "Can I be emotional?" "No. I am busy living, and scanning, and realizing that while this cave is very romantic in a damp fungal sort of way, it is also a dead end." Edwin sat up groaning as his joints protested. The moment passed, but the warmth of it remained a tether, keeping him grounded. "It is not a dead end," Edwin said, wiping the blood from his face. "These lava tubes connect to the old mining grid." "And the cabin?" Annie asked, looking up at the chute they had come down. Edwin shook his head. "Gone. Brack will tear it apart piece by piece. He will realize we aren't in the wreckage. He will track the thermal vent." "We can't go back up," Annie said. "No," Edwin agreed. "And we can't stay here." He looked at Slate, then at Annie. "The drive," Edwin said. "You said the only place to broadcast the data is the Lattice Ruins." "Yes," Annie nodded. "But that is 20 kilometers across the open ice, in the middle of the convergence." "And that," Edwin said, standing up and offering her a hand, "is exactly why they won't expect us to go there." He pulled her to her feet. She stumbled, and he caught her. For a second, he held her just to make sure she was steady. "Brack thinks I am broken," Edwin said, his voice gaining strength. "He thinks I burned out up there. He thinks I am hiding in a hole licking my wounds." He looked at his gauntlets. The lights were dim, dormant. "He is right," Edwin said. "I am wounded, but I am not done." "The Lattice Ruins," Annie said, looking at the dark tunnel ahead. "The Aurora is the strongest there. The interference will be blinding." "Good," Edwin said. "I like the dark." "Puck," Edwin commanded. "Map the tubes. Find us a route that pops up within 5 kilometers of the ruins." "Processing," Puck chirped. "I have found a route. It passes through a dormant magma chamber and a colony of blind cave bats. It will be delightful. Shall I play some traveling music?" "No," Edwin and Annie said in unison. "Everyone is a critic," Puck muttered, floating ahead. Edwin looked at Annie. "Can you walk?" "For 20 kilometers, Annie adjusted her rifle, wincing. "I will crawl if I have to. Just get me to that transmitter." "Let's go," Edwin said. He took point, the light from his helmet cutting through the gloom. They walked into the dark, leaving the surface world behind. Above them, the cabin was being destroyed. Above them, the black Aurora was screaming. But down here in the quiet of the earth, there was just the sound of boots on stone, and the steady beat of hearts that had decided to keep beating against all odds. The cabin was lost. The safety was gone. All that was left was the storm, the ruins, and the truth. And for the first time in 10 years, Edwin didn't feel like he was waiting to die. He felt like he was preparing to win. The journey from the lava tubes to the surface was a climb through hell's chimney, but when they finally broke through the crust and into the open air, Edwin realized that hell had frozen over. They stood on the edge of the obsidian plains. In the distance, rising like the ribcage of a dead god, were the lattice ruins. They were massive geometric pillars of black metal that hummed with a frequency so low it rattled the teeth in Edwin's skull. But it was the sky that stopped them. The black aurora had achieved total saturation. The sky was no longer a canvas of stars. It was a swirling, viscous vortex of melting ink. Great ribbons of violet and bruised indigo dripped down toward the horizon, defying gravity, reaching for the earth like thirsty roots. The sound was deafening, a choir of screaming metal and static. "It is beautiful," Puck whispered, hovering close to Edwin's shoulder. In a "we are all going to die" sort of way. "Keep moving," Edwin shouted over the wind. "We have 20 minutes before the convergence peaks. If we are not at the console by then, the interference will fry the drive." They ran. Edwin took point, his boots crunching on the permafrost. Annie ran beside him, her face pale, one hand pressed against her fractured ribs, the other gripping the strap of her rifle. Slate limped behind them, his head low, his yellow eyes fixed on the ruins. The wolf was exhausted, his fur matted with ice and dried blood, but he refused to stop. As they entered the perimeter of the ruins, the air changed. It became heavy, charged with static electricity. Sparks danced off the metal pillars. The hair on Edwin's arms stood up. "Do you hear that?" Puck asked, his optical lens rotating frantically. "The wind," Annie gasped. "No," Puck said. "The pillars. They are harmonizing. They are not just conducting the energy. They are listening to it." They reached the center of the ruins. It was a circular amphitheater, dominated by a central plinth, made of a material that looked like glass, but felt like warm skin. Above them, the eye of the aurora stared down a tunnel of light that seemed to lead straight into another dimension. "The interface is there," Annie shouted, pointing to a slot in the plinth. She dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she fumbled with Slate's collar. The wolf whined, nuzzling her face. "I know, boy," she whispered. "Almost done." She unlatched the heavy metal collar. It clicked open, revealing the data drive embedded within. She slammed it into the interface slot. For a second, nothing happened. Then the ruins screamed. A beam of pure white light shot up from the plinth, punching a hole through the swirling darkness of the aurora. The pillars around them lit up, projecting a three-dimensional hologram into the center of the amphitheater. It wasn't just data. It was a memory. Giant, ghostly figures materialized in the snow. It was a recording of Silas Brack, standing in a command center, ordering the purge of a civilian outpost. The audio was crisp, cutting through the storm. "Burn it," the holographic Brack said, his face 10 feet tall and distorted by the light. "No witnesses. The aurora belongs to me. If they won't evacuate, they become part of the experiment." "It is working," Edwin said, watching the projection. "The system is broadcasting it on the emergency frequency. Every receiver in the sector is seeing this." "It is not enough," Annie said frantically, typing on the holographic keyboard that had appeared. "The upload is only at 10%. The interference is fighting back." "Then we buy time," Edwin said. He turned to face the entrance of the ruins. He didn't have to wait long. Shadows detached themselves from the storm. Silas Brack emerged from the mist, flanked by 6 of his null-gravity troopers. But Brack was different. He was wearing a suit Edwin had never seen before, bulky chromed, pulsating with blue veins of energy that mimicked the flow of the aurora. He didn't walk. He floated, his feet inches above the ground. "Turn it off, Edwin," Brack's voice boomed, amplified by his suit. "I don't think I will," Edwin replied. He stepped forward, placing himself between the soldiers and Annie. He raised his hands. The gauntlets woke up humming with a violent, unstable energy. "You look tired, soldier," Brack mocked, drifting closer. "You used the field to stop my net. I saw the energy spike. You are burning out. One more push and your brain will liquefy. Then I will make it a good one, Edwin growled. He thrust his hand forward. A wave of gravity distortion rippled through the air, aiming to crush Brack into the ground. Brack didn't flinch. He pressed a button on his chest. A bubble of blue light expanded around him. Edwin's gravity wave hit the bubble and dissolved, scattering into harmless static. You are obsolete, Brack sneered. I have synthesized the frequency. I don't need talent. I have engineering. He raised his own hand. A beam of distorted gravity, artificial, cold, precise, shot out. It hit Edwin like a freight train. Edwin was thrown backward, skidding across the ice. He slammed into one of the pillars, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He gasped, tasting blood. Edwin! Annie screamed, her fingers flying across the console. 30%! Edwin struggled to his feet. The headache was blinding now. He could hear the Aurora whispering to him. Let go! Join us! It is so easy! He wants you to use it, Brack said, gliding closer. I don't want to kill you, Edwin. You are a biological marvel. You are the only one who has survived the exposure this long. I want to know how. Surrender, and I will let the girl live. I will even let the wolf live. Edwin looked at Annie. She was small, against the massive machinery, fighting a war with code while he fought with physics. She looked back at him, her eyes wide with fear. Don't listen to him, she yelled. I can save them, Brack pressed. Or I can let the Aurora finish what it started. Look up, Edwin. Edwin looked. The vortex was descending. The tips of the violet ribbons were touching the tops of the pillars. The air was becoming unbreathable, thick with ozone and power. I am not a tool, Edwin spat. He gathered his strength. He didn't push this time. He pulled. He grabbed the loose scree and ice around Brack's feet and flung it upward, turning the ground into shrapnel. Brack's shield flared, deflecting the debris, but the distraction worked. Slate launched himself from behind the pillar, clamping his jaws onto the hydraulic line of Brack's leg. Get off! Brack roared, shaking his leg. He backhanded the wolf with a gauntlet of reinforced steel. Slate yelped a sharp breaking sound and flew across the amphitheater, landing in a heap near the console. He didn't get up. Slate! Annie cried out, abandoning the console to run to the wolf. No! Edwin shouted. Keep uploading, 50%, Puck announced, dodging a blast of plasma from one of the troopers. But we are running out of battery sanity and luck. Edwin stood alone in the center of the ruins. Brack hovered before him, invincible in his stolen power. The troopers raised their rifles. Last chance, Brack said. Give me the access codes to the lattice control, or I wipe you all out. Edwin felt the pull of the Aurora. It was overwhelming. It was like a lover's hand dragging him toward the precipice. If he opened the door fully, he could crush Brack. He could crush the whole moon, but he would lose himself. Why? Edwin asked, his voice shaking. Why do you need the codes? You have the suit. You have the power. Because the lattice won't open for me, Brack screamed, losing his composure. I have the tech. I have the force. But the damn machine rejects the artificial signal. It demands a biological key. He pointed a metal finger at Edwin. It demands a user. A true user. Edwin froze. A cold realization trickled down his spine, colder than the ice. He turned his head slowly to look at Annie. She was kneeling beside Slate, her hand on the console. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at him. Her face was a mask of tragedy. Annie? Edwin whispered. What does he mean? Annie closed her eyes. A tear tracked through the dirt on her cheek. The lattice, she said, her voice trembling, but audible over the storm. It was built by the ancients to stabilize the core. It locks down during the convergence to prevent planetary destruction. It can only be accessed. It can only be opened. By a field user, Edwin finished. By a field user who demonstrates resonance, Annie said, opening her eyes. Resonance of intent. The machine is empathetic, Edwin. It doesn't respond to aggression. It responds to sacrifice, to the act of saving. The world seemed to stop spinning. The distress signal, Edwin said. The voice of Kale. The specific frequency. I said it, Annie confessed. She stood up. She looked small, broken, and terrified. I didn't crash on Sable Hollow by accident, Edwin. I came here for you. I knew who you were. I knew you were the last living user of the Forbidden Field. Edwin felt like he had been gutted. You hunted me, he whispered. Brack was hunting me, Annie corrected, stepping forward. That part was true. The data is real. The danger is real. But I knew we couldn't broadcast the truth without the lattice. And I knew the lattice wouldn't open for me. It needed you. But not just you, it needed you to care. She gestured to the ruins around them. It creates a test, she said. The voluntary rescue. If you had come to the crash site to kill me, the lattice would have remained dormant. But because you came to save us, because you used the field to protect life, not take it, you woke it up. Edwin stared at her. The betrayal was a physical pain in his chest. You manipulated me, he said. The crash, the wolf, the helpless act. It was all a script to make me a hero. Brack shot us down for real, Annie cried. Slate took a bullet for real. I bet our lives on you, Edwin. That is not a script. That is a desperate gamble. And if I had stayed in the cabin, Edwin asked coldly. Then we would have died in the snow, Annie said, and the world would have stayed in the dark. Brack laughed. It was a cruel, metallic sound. Oh, this is rich, the warden crowed. The cat played the mouse to catch the lion. And you fell for it, Edwin. She used you. She used your trauma, your guilt, your pathetic need for redemption. She wound you up like a toy soldier. Brack landed, stepping closer to Edwin. She doesn't love you, Brack hissed. You are just the key to the lock. So be the key. Open the full system for me and I will kill her quickly. It is more than she deserves. Edwin looked at Brack. Then he looked at Annie. She wasn't begging. She wasn't apologizing anymore. She was standing over Slate, her hand resting on the wolf's slowing heart. She looked at Edwin with a fierce, unwavering gaze. I lied about the destination, Annie said softly. But I never lied about the trust. I told you a promise is a claw. I am still holding on Edwin. Are you? Edwin looked down at his hands. The gauntlets were scarred old and battered, just like him. He had been a weapon for the military. He had been a recluse for himself. And for the last 3 days he had been a tool for a plan he didn't understand. But as he looked at Slate, the wolf who had jumped in front of a laser for him, he realized something. The wolf didn't know the plan. The wolf just knew the man. Annie might have started this with a lie, but she had stayed for the truth. She could have run in the tunnels. She could have left him when he broke down. She didn't. Inconvenient, Edwin muttered. He looked up at Brack. You want the key? Edwin asked. Give it to me, Brack demanded, holding out his hand. Okay, Edwin said. Catch. Edwin slammed his fists together. He didn't aim at Brack. He didn't aim at the troopers. He aimed at the lattice plinth. He reached out with his mind, grabbing the resonance frequency of the ancient machine. He felt the connection snap into place. The machine recognized him. It felt his anger, his betrayal, his love, his fear. It felt the sacrifice. User identified. The voice of the ruins whispered in his head. Command invert, Edwin roared. No, Brack screamed, realizing too late what was happening. Edwin didn't open the door for the broadcast. He didn't unlock the power. He grabbed the convergence point, the massive funnel of energy from the aurora, and he tied a knot in it. He used the field to pull the sky down. I am closing the shop, Edwin yelled. He channeled everything he had, every scrap of potential, every neuron in his brain, every memory of the field, into a single crushing point of singularity. He forced the lattice to reverse its polarity. Instead of receiving the energy, it pushed it back. The feedback loop was catastrophic. Brack's suit, tuned to the frequency of the aurora, suddenly found itself out of phase. The energy it was siphoning turned volatile. "Stabilize!" Brack shrieked, clawing at his chestpiece. "System stabilize!" But Edwin was holding the frequency. He was burning. He could feel his mind unraveling his memories of the war, of the cabin, of Kale turning to ash. He was pouring his soul into the machine to create a wall that Brack couldn't cross. "Annie!" Edwin gasped, his vision going black. "Now send it." The inversion created a momentary vacuum, a perfectly clear channel in the eye of the storm. Annie slammed her hand onto the enter key. "Upload complete," the console chirped. The hologram of Brack's crimes exploded outward, beaming not just to the local sector, but bouncing off the inverted shield Edwin had created, amplifying it to the entire system. "You fool!" Brack screamed. His suit began to glow a blinding white. "You are killing us all." "Just you," Edwin whispered. He gave one last push. He felt the connection to the field snap. Not just the machine, but inside him. The node in his brain, the thing that made him special. The thing that made him a monster. It burned out. Silence. Then a shockwave of pure kinetic force blasted outward from the ruins. It hit Brack first. His suit overloaded with conflicting gravity. Waves imploded. There was no blood. Just a crunch of metal, and a flash of blue light, and then the warden was gone, sucked into the very distortion he had tried to master. The troopers were blown off their feet, their weapons scattering. Edwin fell. He hit the ground, and for a long time he didn't know if he was dead. He couldn't feel his hands. He couldn't hear the wind. Then warmth. He opened his eyes. The sky was clearing. The black aurora was retreating, pulling back, like a tide that had been commanded to leave. The stars were coming out cold and sharp and indifferent. Annie was leaning over him. Her face was dirty, streaked with tears framed by the starlight. "You are alive," she sobbed. Edwin tried to move his left hand. It felt heavy, inert. He tried to summon the field to feel the hum of gravity. Nothing. Just silence. The noise in his head, the planets grinding, the universe moving, was gone. "I can't feel it," Edwin rasped. "It is gone." Annie smiled, a heartbreaking, beautiful expression. She brushed the hair back from his forehead. "You chose to be a good man right when I planned to let you hate me," she whispered. "That was terribly inconvenient of you." "I try," Edwin wheezed. "Boss." Puck drifted into view, looking singed and wobbling in the air. "I have analyzed the atmospheric data. The storm is gone. And oh, I have a message." "From who?" Annie asked, helping Edwin sit up. "From everyone," Puck said. The drone projected a holographic screen. It was scrolling with text, thousands of lines moving too fast to read. But the audio channel crackled to life. It wasn't static. It was voices. "This is Outpost 4. We saw it. This is the freighter Karen. We have the data. This is Central Command. Warden Brack is designated rogue. Support units are inbound." And then, a single clear voice from the flagship of the Coalition fleet. "Sable Hollow, this is Admiral Vance. We heard you. Hold position. Help is coming." Edwin leaned back against the pillar. He looked at Slate. The wolf was awake, licking his injured leg. He paused, looked at Edwin, and gave a soft woof. Edwin looked at his hands. They were just hands now. No power, no magic, just bone and skin. He had lost the thing that made him a god. But as Annie wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his neck, he realized he had gained something much more dangerous. A future. Epilogue, 3 months later. The winter on Sable Hollow was harsh, but the cabin was warm. The blast door had been replaced with a salvage unit from a decommissioned cruiser. It didn't fit perfectly, but it kept the wind out. Edwin sat in his chair, watching the snow fall against the glass. His left arm still ached when the pressure dropped a phantom pain from a life he didn't live anymore. He picked up his soldering iron. He was fixing a toaster. It was mundane, boring work. He loved it. The airlock cycled open with a hiss. A gust of cold air blew in, carrying the scent of pine and ozone. "You are letting the heat out," Edwin grumbled without looking up. "Stop complaining, old man," Annie's voice floated in. "I brought supplies. And real coffee. Not that sludge you brew." She walked into the room, shaking snow from her flight jacket. She looked healthy. Her ribs had healed. She moved with the confident grace of a pilot who had her wings back. She set a crate on the table. "The fleet is still mopping up Brack's loyalists," she said, pouring herself a cup of water. "But the Council has ratified the Protection Act. The Farallon borders are safe." "Good," Edwin said, tightening a screw. "They want to give you a medal," Annie said. "Again." "Tell them to mail it," Edwin said. "I will use it as a shim for the generator. It wobbles." Annie laughed. She walked over to him and leaned against the console. She looked at his hands, steady, skilled but ordinary. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. Edwin paused. He looked at the scars on his arm, now faded to silvery lines. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I miss the view, but I don't miss the noise." A heavy shape bumped against his leg. Edwin looked down. Slate was there. The wolf had healed, though. He walked with a slight limp that gave him a rakish veteran swagger. He looked up at Edwin, his yellow eyes, bright and intelligent. Then, with a deliberate slowness, Slate turned around and sat down, directly on Edwin's foot. He leaned his entire weight against Edwin's leg, let out a long sigh, and closed his eyes. "He is doing it again," Edwin said. "He is claiming his territory," Annie grinned. "It is a high honor. It means you are furniture now, essential furniture." Edwin looked at the wolf, crushing his toes. He looked at the woman, smiling at him with eyes that held no secrets. "I can live with that," Edwin said. He went back to fixing the toaster. Outside, the black aurora danced in the sky, beautiful and distant, singing a song that Edwin could no longer hear and didn't need to answer.